Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being patient with us up here. I haven't received any public comment forms at all, so we're going to take that as something that we don't usually get, but we'll move on with our agenda then. So what I'd like to do then is to call a meeting to order, and the secretary would she please call a roll?
Mr. Brown.
Here.
Mrs. Coletti. Here. Mr. Heisel. Mrs. Sanders. Mrs. Stockton. Here. Secretary here. President Rose.
Here. We all stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty. We're all different places. Okay. Since we don't have any public comment forms, the next item on the agenda is go into closed session. I have been informed that we do need to go in for some closed session in regards to personnel. So I need a motion to go into closed.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Coletti.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Stockton. Secretary, please call a roll.
Mrs. Coletti. Mrs. Stockton.
Aye.
Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Secretary aye. President Rose.
Aye. We are in closed. it's in consent, and then okay. For George, or go ahead. Oh, yeah. Okay. Good evening. Need to get a motion to come out of closed.
So move.
Moved by Mr. Brown, second by Mrs. Coletti. Secretary, please call a roll.
Mrs. Stockton,
Aye.
Mr. Brown,
Aye.
Mrs. Coletti. Secretary, I, President Rose.
Aye. We are out of close and back in open session. The next item that we have on the agenda for this evening is the beginning of the business meeting, and the first item on that is the consent agenda. So I need to have a motion to approve the consent agenda as listed in our agenda meeting notes.
Move.
Moved by Mrs. Coletti,
Second.
second by Mrs. Stockton. Do we have any comments or questions on the consent agenda? If not, then would the secretary please call a roll?
Mr. Brown,
Aye.
Mrs. Coletti,
Aye.
Mrs. Stockton.
Aye. Aye.
Secretary, I, President Rose.
Aye. Consent agenda motion is approved. There are some donations that were in the consent agenda, and I'd like to thank the various businesses that made generous donations. The first one being Charter Fitness of Mokina on behalf of the students and staff of Monee Elementary School. Their donation of school supplies. Thank you very much for that. The next item in donations was on behalf of Crete Monee High School Athletics. the high school cheerleading team, especially from Tim Snelson's pumping unit service for his generosity in donating to the cheerleading account. Thank you very much for that donation. The next item we have is from Coretta Scott King Magnet School on behalf of Pastor Peggy Johnson and the congregation of St. Paul's UCC of Monee for their generous supply of school donations. And that, I believe, is all of the donations that we have for this month so far. So the next item that we're going to go to is the action reports on the agenda. And the first item that we have there is superintendent update on board policy. So the action required there is the modification of board policy 753. So I'm going to entertain a motion to approve this update to the board policy.
Move.
Moved by Mrs. Coletti,
Second.
second by Mrs. Stockton. Comments or questions? I think Dr. Rogers.
Excuse me, at the last month's meeting, we talked about 3 changes or 3 updates to this policy. The first one being that we know that seats are assigned to Coretta Scott King by percentages based on the community that students live in, and the way that the board policy reads is that seats are allocated by percent by classroom, and in speaking with the principal of the building, she says that that's not always the case, that it's done. The percentages are held to, but they're held to by grade level, more so than by classroom. So instead of 10 seats in the case of University Park being given to each class, 20 seats are given to the grade level. As far as University Park residents are given 20 seats per grade. So that was one change that we wanted to make, just to make the policy accurate to the actual practice. The second issue is on page 2 in terms of the family admission policy as it relates to kindergarten students, that we needed to give a broader definition to eligible siblings based on the case that we brought to the board of a parent who actually had the parental rights of a child, legal guardianship of a child who was of kindergarten age that happened to not be her birth child. And so we have widened the definition to include foster children, adopted children, stepchildren, or a child for whom the parent does have legal custody to, as long as the child does live with the parent and is, again, falls in one of those categories. The last change was the change that the board had some concern about and asked me to reconsider the language, and it was under the reasons for removal from the school. We talked about the concern that sometimes we have families that do not enroll or register annually in an appropriate amount of time so that we can make the decisions that we need to make if they're not going to come back. So instead of doing what we had originally proposed, we just decided to do what we do for all schools, and that is if they're not registered or have not notified us in some way by the 10th day of student enrollment, they're dropped from district enrollment. We do this in all of our schools. It's just that you might say, well, why do we need to say it in policy? It's because you just don't want to have an issue of people thinking that because we're enrolled in this school that certain rules don't apply to families. And so This is a rule that goes on with all of our students in the district, and I know that Erin does a nice job and her staff in making sure that if there are any parents that are out there that have not registered, I know for a fact that she calls the families to make sure that they're aware that they need to register, and she wants to know, are they returning? So if she cannot get a hold of them, if she's made every effort and they still don't show up by the 10th day, then I feel that we need to have the right to be able to drop them, which starts a vacancy, and that vacancy can then be filled by the waiting list. So those are the 3 changes that we would like for the board to approve tonight, unless you have something else that you would like to question or add or revise.
I do have a question for, just to get clarity, when we're looking at the percentages of the villages in the grade level, and we're just saying grade level because of how kids are placed in classrooms, right?
Yes.
Just to, clarify that.
See, what we don't want to have happen is, let's say that there's an issue where, and I'm just making this up, that 2 students, they happen to be from the same village, truly need to be separated. They've proven, let's say in grades 2 and 3, that there's some sort of ongoing problem that may be social or discipline related, that it just isn't in their best interest that they're in the same classroom. And let's say that the numbers have pretty much stayed like we see on this sheet of paper. The principal needs to retain the right to say, we are going to put that child in a different classroom, which may make the University Park seats drop by 1 if it's from University Park or Crete or whatever the village is. And instead, it's replaced with someone from another village, which may increase the number for that village, but the overall percentage hasn't changed for the grade level. University Park hasn't lost any seats just because the principal makes those switches. So that's all we're saying. No one loses any seats. It's just that we want to give the administration the authority to make some changes if they feel they need to make those changes that are in the best interest of the child.
Okay, and then concerning notifying the school prior to the 10th day of student enrollment, I know that at the end of the year, a letter goes home asking parents to notify if their children will not be returning, but I'm suggesting that we also put this in the letter so our parents are aware if we haven't heard from you on the 10th day.
Yes. We can do that. I think, again, I don't want to have Erin come up to the mic just for this, but I'm almost certain that this policy in particular, because it has so much information about Coretta Scott King, if it isn't plastered different places in the sense of newsletters, handbooks, and so on, if it's not, we'll make sure that these points that you're making tonight are certainly communicated very clearly with the families.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we do have a motion on the table to approve this board policy. So all those in favor of approving this board policy, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Abstentions, none. The motion to approve the updated board policy is approved. The next item we have on action reports is in the business section, and it's the wetlands compensation agreement. It's in regards to the District of Illinois capital construction grant contingent upon a district executing an agreement to purchase wetlands credits required by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. So I need a motion in order to approve this wetlands compensation agreement.
Move.
Moved by Mrs. Coletti,
Second.
second by Mr. Brown. Bob, I think you want to expand on that just a little bit?
In August, the board approved the agreement between the district and the Capital Development Board, which outlined the terms of purchasing these wetland credits, which are essentially a penalty that the district has to pay for due to the construction of this high school. There was 1.5 acres of wetlands that were infringed upon at the time, and now that we're eligible to receive state grant funding as a reimbursement of the project of the high school, the capital development funds that they're looking to give us from the 2003 construction grant, we have to offset that damage to the wetlands. So we worked with the Department of Natural Resources to essentially purchase these wetland credits. So the agreement was already made. There was just some minor revisions that the Capital Development Board wanted to put into the agreement. On board book, you'll see the edits that were made to the agreement. Our attorney has reviewed their edits. Essentially, it's just clarifying the role that the Department of Natural Resources is playing in the transaction, which is now that their role is basically they don't have a role in this because we have already satisfied their requirements. So at this time, if the board approves this agreement, this is basically the vehicle that will get the Capital Development Board to finally process our payment. So essentially, you would approve this tonight. I'll forward this to the Capital Development Board tomorrow. They'll sign off on this tomorrow or the next day. And then once we make our 10% payment, our 10% down payment on the wetland credits, they'll process our payment at that time, which means they send the voucher to the comptroller's office, and we should receive the funds within 4 to 6 weeks. And then once they process our payment, we would then pay off the balance of the 90% to pay off the wetland credit price. So that's what the terms of this agreement is spelling out, and like I said, the board has already approved the agreement. It's just this is the most updated and final version of the agreement that clarifies the role of the DNR.
And Bob, I have a question. The $560,000 that's required to purchase the credits is going to be reflected on the final budget in what category we're at?
I'm going to budget for the $560,000 purchase of the wetland credits out of the capital projects fund.
Okay.
And then I'll budget $560,000 of revenue coming in to offset that.
Okay.
Just to reflect minimally, we know almost for certain by signing this agreement and moving forward that we're going to be purchasing these wetland credits. But I'm not going to budget for the other balance of the capital project fund money, because since we don't really have that payment in the bank yet, we don't have that. We haven't received the funds yet as of September. We're not going to put that into the initial legal budget in terms of what fund to put those funds into. When we do receive that money during the year, obviously that'll be reported at a board meeting. We'll have a public hearing and we'll discuss it at that time. But it's not certain enough this late into September. Like I said, even after we sign this tonight, it could be another 4 to 6 weeks before we get the money. So we can't put it into our legal budget without, knowing that we won't even have the money until weeks after the budget is adopted.
Okay, so at what point are we going to submit the $56,000 earnest money? At what point is that submitted?
So the $56,000 will be part of the $560,000 that we're going to budget for out of the capital projects fund. So I'm just going to show there's going to be an expenditure of $560,000, and then you'll see matching revenue coming in to offset the $560,000.
The revenues. Okay.
And you'll see that in the non-operating funds when we present the legal budget. Because really the acquisition of land, guess this would be considered land even though it's wetland credits. It would be considered land, and any time you're acquiring facilities or land, it should really be purchased out of the capital projects fund, not the operations and maintenance fund like we initially discussed.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions at all for Bob? If not, we do have a motion on the table to approve the wetlands compensation agreement. So would the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Stockton?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mrs. Coletti?
Aye.
Secretary, aye. President Rose?
Aye. The motion to approve the wetlands compensation agreement is approved. The next action item we have in the business part of our action reports is an independent contractor agreement. Need a motion to approve this independent contract agreement to provide free dental services to district students. Looking for a motion to approve this.
So move.
Moved by Mr. Brown,
Second.
second by Mrs. Stockton. Again, Bob, probably up to you.
Our district health department contacted me, and they wanted to allow this dentist to come into two of our buildings, the ELC building and the sixth grade center, to provide free basic basic clean and check procedures as required by the state for these different grade levels. So the appropriate way to handle something like this would be to use our standard independent contractor agreement that we have for the district, which basically just outlines the scope of the services, the dates, the locations. It spells out insurance requirements, background check requirements, all the different legal requirements that would be associated with letting someone come in and have, direct contact with our students. So we're going to use that standard independent contractor agreement. So we have it filled out here, and then tonight would be, if the board wants to allow this service, you would just authorize this agreement, and then we would present this to the dentist, who would sign off on it as well. And then, of course, follow up to make sure that they get the background checks and provide the insurance requirements and everything that's spelled out in the contract.
I have a question. I think because this agreement that we have sometimes is very broad, because I'm trying to find it and I don't find it. I haven't found it. I think that we also need to just have a copy of the license of the dentist in charge, or someone to know that they are
Right.
licensed and insured, those two things.
In the state.
Yeah, I think in
Yeah,
section
licensed in the state of Illinois at that.
Section 1.2, letter C, I know it says they need to have the licenses or
Okay.
certificates required.
All right.
So that'll be just another item from the contract that we'll have to follow up on and
Right.
collect.
And obviously, it's not stated, but I'm going to assume that parents are going to have to give permission.
Yeah, it'll be a permission slip type
Okay.
process.
All right.
Also, clarify, Bob, please, says charges taken care of through Kid Care / Medicaid.
Right. The district will not pay any costs associated with this, and neither will the parents. I think the only payment that the dentist might be receiving would be anything that they could claim through this Kid Care or Medicaid programs, through the different paperwork that they could file through the state on their half. But in terms of billing or any collections, the district's completely uninvolved with that process.
So when they get permission from the parents, are they asking them if they currently have Kid Care or Medicaid? Are they using their case
I believe so. I
numbers?
think it would be, both the dentist and the parent would probably be filling out paperwork regarding the permission, and then also any billing through those two programs would be handled through, the paperwork that the parents are filling out.
Is that disclosed in the paperwork to the parents?
Will it be disclosed? I can make sure that it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments at all about this?
We have anybody else previously providing this service?
No, I think this program might be new, at least in the recent years. I know also Will County provides a similar service, and then Will County will also be coming in and doing the same type of service, but for other locations. I think this dentist was just going to these two locations due to, I think these locations had the space available for them to do that in the building. Will County comes with like a mobile unit where they do it outside. So actually, in a future month, I might be bringing another agreement between the district and Will County, the Will County service, to do the same exact type of service.
Can we just kind of when we finish this service, can we like bring a report back to the board to see what the success rate was with it? And,
Sure.
you know, if there were problems, issues, that kind of thing. I think, you know, because this is kind of new to, I think, us up here doing this kind of
Right,
thing and
right.
stuff, I like to find that out before we start getting too heavily involved with those kind of things.
Okay.
Any other comments at all?
And does this serve, maybe Laura, you can explain, I know at certain grade levels, there's a requirement for dental, isn't there like a dental exam required at certain grade levels that you have to produce? Or
I
maybe
think
John, do you-
the dental, I'm not quite sure. I know there are grade levels that have certain requirements, but I don't know exactly which
Yeah,
ones.
I'm pretty sure it's sixth grade,
Sixth
and
grade,
then
ninth
also
grade.
ELC.
Is that why we're,
Fifth, in kindergarten, maybe?
That is why we're doing it. That's why those 2 grades were chosen. I'm not sure, I just don't have it in front of me, that either one of them are required to the point that if you don't do it, you can be excluded from school. But I do know that kindergarten and 6th grade does require some sort of screening, but is it to the point that if you don't do it, you will be excluded from school? I'm not sure of that right now. I can check and let the board know.
so then this would suffice for that if the
Yes.
parent doesn't?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? We do have a motion on the table to approve this. Would the secretary please call a roll?
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mrs. Coletti?
Aye.
Mrs. Stockton?
Aye.
Secretary, aye. President Rose?
Aye. The approval of the contractor agreement is passed. The next item on the action reports that we have is the personnel report. Recommendation at the previous Board of Education meeting to hire additional teachers to reduce various class sizes. So I'd like a motion to approve this action item.
Moved.
Moved by Mrs. Stockton,
Second.
second by Mrs. Coletti. Dr. Rogers?
At the last board meeting, we presented to the board, I reminded the board of a conversation that we had last spring about class sizes, and the school that was in question last month was Monee Elementary. And the board did remember the conversation, and that we had stated that based on what the enrollments would be in August, we would then make the determination as to whether or not we would purchase the services of an extra 3rd grade teacher to reduce class sizes, and the board agreed to that at the last board meeting. I told the board at that meeting that I was looking over the numbers for enrollment, and I did foresee that there may be one more request that I would have to bring to the board. I wasn't sure where it would actually land yet, but I am sure now because the numbers are pretty much in. We really do need to hire probably, as far as just technicalities, it would be 1.5 teachers at the middle school, but I'm asking that we hire 2 teachers because it's very hard to hire a half of a teacher. And there's no one in district that we can sort of combine class assignments with to make up for the other half. So let me take you through the justification. The first issue that I'd like you to look at is on page 76. One of the board members asked at the last meeting, how do we determine, is there some sort of document that we look at that determines when we are going to request extra staff? And I told the board it's actually in the teacher's contract. So this is page 10 in the teacher's contract, 5.4. I want to bring to your attention the first 2 bullets in 5.4. The following criteria and procedures, among others, shall be used to determine efficient class size. A, the capacity of the teaching facility and the number of adequate teaching stations and pupil stations in a room, and B, the appropriateness of the room to the content of the course or purposes to be served and the methods to be employed. One of the things that comes up quite often is the issue of we don't have a per se computer program at the elementary level, but what comes up constantly when it comes to overcrowded classrooms is if you have class sizes of 34, 35, most of our labs have 30 computers in it, and it's not the end of the world if kids have to share, but the problem is sometimes computers aren't functioning the way that they should, and so just to have 30 machines in a room doesn't mean that all 30 of them are operating all the time on that day. What I want to bring to your attention is the course of science in particular, especially at the middle school. If you've ever been in the middle school, they're very odd-shaped rooms. Some are smaller than others, and to put 30 to 35 kids in a science room and then to expect active hands-on science is just not going to work because of the size of the room and the lack of tables and chairs that we have for students. The second page of the contract, which is on 77, point C clearly states the class sizes from kindergarten to 6th grade, and we use the 6th grade figures to go all the way up to high school, even though the contract doesn't say it. So usually when a class exceeds 25 in kindergarten, the contract states that they have the right to make an issue of this with the superintendent and the board to request extra additional staff. In grades 1 through 3, if the average class size exceeds 28, they have the right to make this request. In grades 4 through 6, if it exceeds 32, they have the right to make the request. So with that said, if you go to the next page, which is page 78, this is the current enrollment in 7th grade. It's only for 7th grade that we're speaking of. And there are 3 teams. They roughly have between 140 to 150 students on a team. If you divide that by the number of teachers and sections that they have, you see the figures that you see here. If you look at the key subjects, which would be reading, math, science, CGI stands for Contemporary Global Issues, which is a combo social studies writing class. You see a lot of 32s, 33s, 34s, 35s, 36s. The average, if you were to do the average, is past 32. So thus the request. So if you, and where we want to lower class sizes at is in science, because look at some of these science numbers, 36 in one section and so on. In fact, in a couple of sections. It's very hard, again, to do the type of science program. I mean, some of these math classes are at 35, 36, and we're not talking about honors courses either, and so on. So if you hire one teacher to address the science and the global studies / writing, because we're looking at it as actually a language arts / social science discipline, on page 79, what you're actually doing is you're pulling 30 kids roughly somewhere in that number off of the team, off of the permanent rotation, where the team numbers drop down to more like less than 120, so that all class sizes in the particular subjects that you're targeting get below 30. So with new staff, all class sizes from the very top that you would see, where the new teacher would teach a combination of science and the CGI, to the math that's in the middle, where all the class sizes are dropped to 24, 25, to the bottom, where the team is still intact, but now all of their numbers in those key areas at least drop under 30. Some of these are still high. But for the most part, they drop under 30, is where Kokona and her administrative team asked that we consider hiring the 2 teachers. Now, the other half of the math, I talked to Mike Dugan at the high school. Geometry is overcrowded with the same numbers. I didn't show them, but I'm asking you to trust me that they're at the high 30, 32, 33, 34, 35 level, almost in all of the geometry sections, and there is some need to address algebra for those that are most in need and at risk based on their scores. So there would be 2 sections of math at the high school and 3 sections of math at the middle school, and then the other teacher would be used for language arts / social studies. The only question that I actually didn't want to call Kokona up here, but I might have to ask you this question because I'm anticipating, in case the board would want to know why CGIS versus your reading classes, because even on the last page where you show your reading classes, there are some that are still sort of high. Most of them are low, but some are still high. Could you answer why you chose? Yeah. Okay.
They're out of the regular reading courses.
Right.
The numbers already look different in reading because they're already, those kids are already receiving services, intervention services.
Okay.
Everyone else, all kids take, either they're taking a general, CGI, obviously all kids take that, but all kids take general science.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the numbers are super high in those 2 courses, because regardless of designation, IEP, 504, anything, those kids all sit in those general classes. So every 7th grader gets those 2 courses, which is why they look the most populated.
Right.
And then with math, we don't have the number of interventions that we had in the past. So the kids are either in a general math class or an instructional math class. And that's pretty much where you see the numbers fall out there. So we have more reading interventions in place,
Yes.
obviously, and that's why more kids get pulled off the top.
Yeah, I forgot that
Makes
you
sense?
told me that. Yes, it does make sense. So in case, just so the board understands, they have a if you want to call it, a normal reading class, and then there are some kids that get an additional, it's in addition, intervention. Would that be true?
Their reading class is the intervention.
Okay.
And they mix out on the school class. So they
Okay.
don't get communication hours or arts in 7th grade because we need to get the reading scores and the reading accents. So some of these kids are sitting with us in lot classes and working on really intensive reading skills, phonics, level. I mean, we're talking, we run the gamut. So we run from that type of level through all the way to phonics. And the kids who are in block are always pulled off for that. So it's block classes for a reason. To get them
So the few, because I announced as I'm looking, it's really only 3 classes that still remain above 30 after the reduction in reading. They're okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Fine, and we can play around, like balancing the numbers a little bit. If the class size are alleviated in science and social studies, you can play around with balancing. If one section's a little higher than another reading, you can use some
Okay.
more options that way.
All right.
I have a question, since Ms. Creasos is up here. Because my concern, of course, is taking kids out of a class they're getting used to. So something like this would need to, take place very quickly. What is the likelihood of finding someone that is, holds a language arts endorsement and a science endorsement? And if you can't find anyone, what's an alternative?
The alternative would be a math science split,
Probably more easier to.
we need a language arts designation and a science. And a lot of the people coming out with their degrees are mostly have the language arts endorsement as sort of a standard, and then they endorse in other areas. It's a matter of finding somebody now. That's going to be the bigger question, is finding somebody with the certification and the availability now. But if we had difficulty, we'd have to split the science now. I think that would be a better way to do it that way. But I have faith
I don't think we'll have a problem.
You don't think so? Wow.
A lot of them are subbing. A lot of them are doing long-term subs, so,
So there's a lot that hold multiple endorsement.
yes.
Especially at the
That's
middle
pretty
school.
common.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, and Dr. Rogers, when you look at the procedure that's driving the recommendation, and look at I on page 76, I, that's India 2 or Igloo 2. It talks about at what point you will be looking at the possibility and the recommendation for hiring another teacher. And I'm trying to differentiate when a teacher is being recommended as opposed to a teacher's aide. So on 3, and list all the different bullets on there, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, A, B, and C. But it really doesn't say about at what point a teacher
Yeah,
will
you're
be
correct
recommended.
in that you are correct. Usually, it's a matter really of past practice. We have used this part of the contract to try to hire teachers if we can, either like we did with Monee before school starts, or within the first 10 days of school to at least make the recommendation. Because although, yes, it's not best case scenario, I understand what Board Member Hall is saying in terms of an interruption to kids that might be attached to a teacher now 3, 4, 5 weeks into school. No, it's not the best, but in the long run, I much rather have my own child, if it was my child, to be in a science class or a math class where the ratio of teacher to students is more reasonable, where that teacher can give my child more time, than to have an overcrowded classroom with an aide. Where we make the determination of aide is if, let's say, second semester, where we still sometimes get a large influx because leases are expiring for people who are a little more mobile. Believe it or not, we get a large influx of kids after January, and then we feel it's not economically the best thing to do to hire a full-time teacher at that time. Then we start talking about aides or some other way to try to manage till the end of the year until we can look at next year to do what Dr. Edison does every spring, which is a staffing plan, and talk to the principals about their staffing needs for the following year.
And I definitely understand that a teacher would probably be best in these situations here. But however, you know, with the financial challenges that we have going forward, and you know, are we really taking into consideration the impact, the difference in you know, financially that would occur between a teacher? I mean, it's a juggling act, and a teacher's aide is definitely a juggling act. So we as a district, given that we are looking at a deficit budget moving forward for a couple years to come, we as a district feel at this point we can absorb these costs to move forward with hiring a couple more teachers at this point.
I do believe that, and I believe that because, again, you know, as I stated in the last board meeting, we have, and you know, we don't have George, our resident historian, here, but anyone who's been here for quite a while knows that this is true, that the practice has been, and I'm not saying that all practices, just because we do it year after year, doesn't need to be examined, but I'm still saying the practice has always been in this district, there is a mobile population that we have. That's well documented. And the population rises and falls sometimes at different grades in different schools. It hits the tidal wave, if you want to call that, might hit in a different community next year. And so we always build that contingency in. It's always been a contingency of at least minimally having set aside in the budget to do 4 teachers every year in case we have to.
Okay.
And so since we've done it, it's already in the budget. I know that we have a deficit budget, but at the same time, we have a plan to balance the budget. So I would still say this is my recommendation, and I think that we need to do it.
Agree. And, okay, I agree with you on that. And, you know, I guess moving forward, again, the purpose and the mission and why we are here is for the academic achievement of our kids. And this would greatly impact our kids in a positive way, I believe, by hiring the teachers. So if we can handle, we can absorb those costs. It's within our budget, given that although we still have a deficit budget, I feel good about it.
Okay. Thank you.
I also would like to say, and I understand Board Member Brown's concern, because we definitely need to be fiscally responsible. But if we're going to spend money anywhere, this is where we need to spend the money. And for me, I'm always concerned when you see numbers in the 30s, mid-30s. There's a lot more, you know, that goes into that. I'm thinking about, you know, classroom management, you know, and it's a concern at any grade level, but middle school kids too, you know. So, again, I feel like this is where we need to spend the money. I'm not sure, Tony, even if we did get, you know, aides, and you're looking at multiple aides, you know, would that even equal the salary of, you know, one teacher or whatever? But in my opinion, and I concur with Dr. Rogers, it's better to get a qualified teacher, you know, and to spend that time with the student.
Any other comments at all? I know that's part of the, I'd like to just state that it's always been the board's direction to try to keep class sizes at a minimum for what is reasonable out in best practices out in the education community. So I think that we're on the right path to try to maintain that kind of staffing level with the number of students per classes, so that they get the most benefit out of the educational process. So with that said, if anybody else has any other comments, we do have a motion on the table to approve the personnel report, this action item. So would the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Stockton?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mrs. Coletti?
Aye.
Secretary, aye. President Rose?
Aye. The motion to approve the personnel report and the action item is approved. We're at a point now where we're done with the action reports. I'm going to deviate a little bit from our standard of just running right into the administrative updates and ask anybody if we need to take a break for a few minutes. Yes? Why don't we take 5 here? We'll be right back.
5 minutes.
Somewhere around 5 or 10.
You know what though? We posted the public notice, and then public notice has that date in there. And if we were to change the date, I think
Legally, how much of the notice has to, meaning if we had to repost the notice, how long does the notice have to stay in the paper?
I think it has to be 30 days.
30 days.
Well, because you have to give 30 days notice. I think,
Because this is a special
yeah,
public hearing, so.
I think we got to keep the date. If it, I mean, I think it's more likely that. I think we just try to babysit. Well, Laura even said I could record the presentation on something and you just play it. I mean, the thing is, I mean, you know how I break the presentation down so it's most simplified form, and that when you see the slide and you see the words, almost anybody can read it at that point.
Right.
I mean, if there were really in-depth questions, maybe that would be an issue, but there never seems to be like really complicated questions in terms of, well, my thought was too, because Tara actually brought it up. I mean, she's our accounting supervisor. She said, "Well, I could present it for you." I mean, she has a master's degree in accounting. She knows what this stuff is, so she can do it too. But I mean, you know, we'll have a plan B in place. But ultimately, I'll probably be here.
Well, let's just see what happens.
But yeah.
If push comes to shove, I don't know if I want to. I mean,
Yeah.
it's sad that Tom won't, because I know Tom can do it. But if push comes to shove, I mean, I can a condensed, abbreviated version and be done.
Like I'm looking at a slide from last year because I was going to mention it in my final report here. I mean, and really, I don't elaborate too much on that. I mean, I take like this huge mass of information, and after I sit there for weeks and weeks, in my mind I break it down to those bullet point facts that need to be said. And at that point, the hard part's over. Just saying the bullet point is easier. So anybody can just say it, and as long as there's not a lot of questions behind it, it's not a big deal. So I think we got to leave the date on, because if we were to change the date, the whole issue is public notice.
Right, you'll have lots of people coming in and going. But you said,
See, the thing is like, with all these requirements of post this, do that, 30 days, this, that, I mean, honestly, you could like probably not do any of that stuff for years and nothing would ever happen. But then what happens is if one person was paying attention and they call you on it, and now they line up all this, oh, wait a second, you changed the date, and then we reposted 5 days and it wasn't 30 days until, so your whole budget is really invalid, which means you can't levy, which means I want my property taxes back.
yeah,
So it's like you got to have everything.
all your ducks in a row.
So you don't want
otherwise-
to like, especially on something as big as the budget, change that date because it's just been out there forever now.
Exactly.
And it's like, and you can't make it too much later because it's due by the end of September. So we only got like 4 days to play with. So I'm really hoping. I mean, I think it comes down to it. The thing is, at the lead budget hearing, the point of it is not to go through all the details, the expanded details of the budget. It's just to give a basic rundown.
Right.
If you make it too complicated, it's not a good one.
Not for me.
I mean, if you try and make it complicated and you look out there in the crowd, everyone's looking at it like,
she was.
This is the only thing Rebecca actually was correct about. Was that first couple of years you're gonna look at the budget and go,
Yeah.
what's going on? But then you kind of understand, okay, so this.
This year,
It's the terminology and everything.
in previous years, I don't know why, but it was always, we were always looking at this year compared to last year, what changed, what's going to change. But this year, I think the one thing is, because it's come up, like the question was, okay, we spent $60 million, and the question was, well, what do we spend all that money on? Because we could probably, even if you cut 1%, we cut $600,000 so easily. Well, then that's when the finance committee was sitting down,
We'll be going again.
and when we really looked at the details of what all that money is, the best we came up with was like 100,000 something trimmed out, and everything else is like, well, we came up with that. So I thought the key would be to present it and maybe say, okay, that sounds great.
Well, right now she's timing it, and it's like it's 7 or 8 or something. So, because I had 9:16, and I got 9:23 already. Hurry up! Hurry up! I'll hold you in contempt.
Been in third grade, fourth grade, and now we got some social
And you have to have all that to make it a normal.
special education, there's tuition, there's the, then you just keep going on, and also you start transportation, which you get 1,000 kids, like, really well.
Everything is special ed is pretty non-negotiable.
You got specific mandates. And by the time you get to this end of this like long rants of like, anyone in the crowd just looks at you like,
Wow, they don't get
well,
it.
you do have a lot of stuff to spend money on, and you're like, and none of this is really negotiable. You could say, well, let's just not teach for free. You got to. Let's not transport. Well, you got to transport.
I just think it's so ridiculous that the Department of Natural Resources is basically student.
They are.
That's
You know, I talked to a wetland credit guy today. He said that when dealing with when they do the offset ratio, if you destroy 1 through 5, he said that the standard ratio for most situations is 2 to 1. And for whatever reason, when they're dealing with the capital development board, the ratio is 4 to 1.
because they know they're getting all this money. Like, if you want this, it's extortion. It's ridiculous. In it, you know what? Like, there's
Okay, I've got just about 10 minutes since we took the start of the break, so I like to try to nudge everybody to kind of return back so we can get going again.
ridiculous. Exactly.
I'm sure he did.
Ever.
Well, see, the next item and stuff is his thing, so he's going to come over here and sit down and talk. So.
Oh. Look at all the BP stuff that we go for this. Oh. And then they discovered Missouri, that was talk to me about that. Let him-
You're gonna be presenting his thing next time.
I've been married to an Italian for 27 years, and I'm like talking to my hands now.
You're doing the budget. He's just gonna be on board. Yeah, and then you're gonna do.
You know, I wouldn't mind that because I could like do. I could say like, no, cut.
See, he says he can do it real fast for you.
I can condense. I can make a half-hour thing in 5 minutes.
That's what I always try to do. That's like my thing. How do
So
I
you'd be
make,
even
how do I take
shorter,
4
huh?
hours of talking and put it in 5 minutes?
See?
Well, does it ever mean anything? Never. It never.
Okay, I'd like to get going here. Cool.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We're back, and the next item on the agenda is going into some administrative updates. And first one being is AP testing requirements, and in our agenda it says an action item, but it's really only informational. So, Dr. Rogers?
You know, actually, I would like to withdraw this report because it's not requiring action, and for the sake of time, it doesn't really require. Nothing is of urgency right now where we have to discuss this tonight. I think I want to put it on the next board meeting.
That's
that
fine.
is just a week away. What I will ask the board members to do, if you really didn't get a chance to read this report, really read it with all the attachments to understand the issue and the concern. We're still not going to ask you for action as much as we're going to ask you for some guidance around some things. So if you could read everything, I would appreciate it. But I would like to withdraw this.
Okay, Dr. Rogers, just want to reiterate that us as board members, and I can probably speak for the entire board, that we did read this in advance. That
Okay.
was a commitment we made to you.
Okay, I was just saying if, because I know sometimes we're busy and we don't have a chance to.
We
get
made a
chance to-
commitment to you.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, we'll push this off until our next meeting then, at the request of Dr. Rogers. So, if anybody has a problem with that? No? Okay. All right. Next update is in the business section, fiscal year 12, fourth quarter update. That's
Okay. I have a brief report. We have our final report for school year 2012, our final results. Our revenue budget came in 99% accurate. We collected 1% more than we budgeted, and the expense budget was also 99% accurate. We spent 1% less than we budgeted. So the legal budget was, we were supposed to have a $1.9 million deficit, and the actual result was a $1.2 million deficit. And I just wanted to also highlight the fact that, like we discussed at the legal budget hearing at the beginning of the year, we had a $1.2 million deficit. However, keep in mind that we had absorbed $4 million of state cuts into this fiscal year. So without those state cuts, we actually would have had a $2.78 million surplus. But, you know, unfortunately, that's not reality. We know the state's financial situation, so we need to live with the cuts that they're giving us. Also in the report, you'll see there's a detailed variance analysis by fund showing where all the variances were. And our final audit is currently in process, and the final audit report will be presented to the Finance Committee in November. And I don't anticipate any major variances from these numbers in the final audit. And I think there might be an issue on board book. It looks like, can the board see the reports on there?
Some of it, and then some of it just.
I don't know.
Mine freezes it.
That's fine. I could, if they're not on board book, I could, or actually they'll be posted on board book for tomorrow. Yeah, the pie charts and then the final detailed variance analysis. So if there's no questions on our 2012 final results, this is the fourth. You know, we provide a quarterly update, so we always provide every year you get a quarterly update of how we're progressing through the year on our finances.
Any other questions or comments for Bob about any of this that he just discussed? Very good, Bob. Thank you very much. Next item we have on the administrative updates, Unfortunately, Mr. Elrod had to leave, so we'll put off the FOIA update until next week or the next meeting that we have. In the curriculum thing, we have a 2012 AYP academic report from Mrs. Hirsch. I know you've been waiting all night.
Finally.
There you go.
I'm going to ask the board, as usual, to head down to the audience because we do have a presentation, and if my colleagues who have been so kind as to stay here for this time, if you could kind of move down, because I'd like to make this a little more intimate, I guess. Okay. Are we on? All right, we're on. Good. Just a couple of comments before we start. First of all, last week we did the presentation for the Education Committee, which we had 4 board members there, and had a great discussion. They had a lot of insight into what we were doing, asked some really good questions, so it was a good, I guess, practice run for tonight. And also, last month, Board Member Brown talked at our board meeting about doing monthly academic updates. Not long reports, but 5-10 minutes around some topics. So when we created this report, we took that into account because in previous years, what's happened is, we build up to this big night about the academic report, and in the past, Mike and I have tried to put everything that we possibly have, which we have a lot. We tried to cram it all into the academic night, and it became really long and dragged out, and I think overwhelming for the audience. So what we've done tonight is we've reduced it, tried to get right to the point about what we have just for this report, with the idea that each month now moving forward we will present some more detailed information that would be connected to this. So it was a great suggestion. And I do appreciate it because we are about academics and about students. So, all right, so we're going to start here. And what happened, Tom? Maybe we're not going to start. Is this an omen or something? Oh, there she is. Okay, we always start with her. We love her. If we could hire her, Kokona, she might be available. I don't know. The only thing is she's using chalk, which I think is is not quite up to speed, but we can fix that. Anyway, the overview of the presentation, we always go through the terms for NCLB. We give you the AYP reports that we've received the official reports, but they haven't been posted publicly yet, so we try and give you that information. We go through our district EPAS data, which is Explore Plan and ACT, that are given to our 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. We give you the overview of the school improvement plans. We have an update from our special education department. And then the last part of tonight's presentation is we'll be giving you the list of academic topics for the upcoming months. Again, NCLB terms, and Mr. Heisel told me last week at the end of the presentation, I really need to emphasize this. We are working on a model for No Child Left Behind, which is now an old model. It is due to expire in 2 years, And we have 33 states in the nation that have received waivers from the federal government because this model is outdated. And we've gotten to a point where we're moving to something new, and it's at a point where we're expecting all kids to meet a certain level of performance on our state assessment, and that's just not going to happen. So I want to emphasize, we're legally required to do this and to report this, but it is an outgoing model. Adequate yearly progress is basically the percentage of kids who have to meet a certain cut score on the ISAT and PSAE. The Illinois model is the equal steps model. It increases by 7.5% every year. It's calculated for all students in tested grades as well as our subgroups. And as I said, it's going to be 100% by 2014. A subgroup is 45 students. So if you have a group of students of a certain demographic, low income special ed, that is of 45, it will be counted as a subgroup. If it's less than 45, it doesn't count as a subgroup. The next one is confidence interval, and this is a statistical term, and it just means that the calculation has a certain margin of error, and kind of if you're close enough, because there may be some error in the calculation or variance, they will allow for that. We have examples which I'll point out that give you an idea of what that really is. Then we have safe harbor. Safe harbor is that growth percentage. We always talk about, well, what if you get a lot of growth but you don't meet the AYP target? And that's where safe harbor comes in, but it only applies to the subgroups. It never applies to the all groups. So your subgroups can make AYP because they're making enough growth every year, but unless all students that are tested hit that target percentage that the state has identified for us, you cannot make AYP. And how it works is you take the percentage of students from the year before that met and the percent that didn't, and what you're really trying to do is reduce that group that did not meet by 10% and add that 10% onto the group that did meet. So our example is if we have 40% that did not meet in 1 year, we would take 10% of that, which is 4%, and we want that 4% now to be added on to the 60% that did. So the target for the next year would be 64%. It would go up by 4%. This is the, and this is right off the ISB website, but this is the Illinois Equal Steps model. Again, it ends in 2014. When we started, we were down at 40%. For 2010-11, the AYP target was at 85%. This past year, 2011-12, it was scheduled to be at 92.5%. The state applied for a waiver last February, actually 2 waivers from the federal government, one for the AYP issue and another one for just the bigger overhaul of the Illinois model. The AYP waiver was granted, so I think it was in August, they told us that, oh, it's not going to be 92.5% for the spring. It's only going to be 85. We're going to hold it at 85. So the red arrow indicates that we're on hold at 85. Next year, it's scheduled to go to 92.5, and then the following year, it's scheduled to go to 100%. Now, I did hear late last week that there's a possibility that for this year, it might hold at 85% too. So I don't know how long we're going to hold at 85%. It may or may not, nothing official, but my my contacts are telling me that it might hold at 85. So what we've done here is we've taken some of the data that you'll find on the Illinois Interactive Report Card and through the AYP reports, and we're presenting it today. What we like to start with is the combined testing for all students in all tested areas and how we do as a district. And you can see that for the last several years, we've been fluctuating between that 68 and 71%. And this last number here is the 72. It has a little asterisk behind it. That's because the official number hasn't been released or hasn't been posted yet. So we're making a calculation based on the data that's been provided to us from the state, and we're usually within about 1% of that. We're estimating that it should come in around 72%, and we'll know that probably next month. So if we're within the ballpark, 71, 72, we should be pretty close to that estimated amount. This is our district data, and I'm going to walk you through this because this will set the stage for the rest of the schools. But just some things to keep in mind here. What you're going to see, this first column here is what we did in 2011, and we have percentages here. But if they're red, that means that that percentage did not make AYP. If it's green, it means for that group it did make AYP in 2011. And you can see here for 2011, it was at 85% for both reading and math. If you move over here to this column, the change column, I don't want to call it a growth column because we're looking at different groups of kids every year, but this is how the percentage changed from 2011 to 2012. And if it's green, highlighted in green, it means it was positive. Then you'll see the 2012 column. That's just where our scores ended up after the change happened. And then you'll see here that we have a safe harbor column. So if we had a safe harbor target for those subgroups, that will be listed. Where it's blacked out here, the all group, as you remember, I said there is no safe harbor for all, so that box is shaded out. And then you can see how we did for AYP in this column. Again, if it's green, it's a yes. We did make AYP for that area. If it's red, it's a no, and we didn't. And I put some asterisks there just as some talking points. But you can see for our district here, our white students in reading met AYP. And this is a case right here where we were at 78.4. The target for Safe Harbor was 79.8. We didn't quite make it. We were within a 1.4 percentage points. But that's a case of that confidence interval kicking in. That group tends to be small, or one of our smaller groups. The smaller the group, the larger the confidence interval, the more leeway they give you. Unlike, if you look at the one right underneath it, our black students in reading, they got to 66.9. The target was 67.7, so they're even less than 1 point away. But because that group is larger, they said, no, you're not making AYP for that group. So again, the confidence interval, but a larger group. And then this one, I'm not sure I understand. I guess I could call to the state and find out. But here, we actually got to 76% for our Hispanic students. The target was 75.5, and they said we didn't make AYP. And I'm going to assume that that's because the Hispanic group of students is very small, and so maybe within the confidence interval, there was a larger margin of error. Right. Not a good thing. And I know it's hard to see down here, but you can see at the bottom down here we have other situations for math where, again, our white subgroup for math was at 82.7. It's within the confidence interval, so it was a yes. And again, our Hispanic group for math, they were also within the confidence interval. So I want you to see just kind of how we're interpreting this. So we're going to move on to the schools. What I will tell you about the first three schools that you're going to see, these are our Title I buildings. They made some really good gains last year. And you can see we're going alphabetically, but you can start with Balmoral. And if you look here, you can see last year they had several areas that they did not make AYP in reading, and I think there's 3 in math. But you can also see that they had a lot of change in reading and math. And when you go all the way over to the end over here, a lot of these red areas now have turned to green, so they did make AYP. In fact, if you look, this one right here, the students with disabilities, it was a subgroup last year, but they didn't get the required 45 students, so it doesn't apply anymore. So they actually went from 8 subgroups that did not make AYP in 2011 to only 2 in 2012 that did not make AYP. So that was great movement for them. And again, the ones that are asterisk are examples of, here's a confidence interval where even though they dropped just a tiny little bit, they were still within the confidence interval. Here they exceeded the confidence interval. So you kind of get how that works. Crete Elementary, same thing. Over here in 2011, they had some areas where they did not make AYP. They had double-digit growth or change in some areas here. And when you go over here, again, they went from 6 areas where they did not make AYP in 2011 to 2 for 2012. So they had some significant changes. And again, you know, even though they made 11% change in their all reading, it wasn't enough to get them to the 85%. But they still had some great gains. And then Talala is our third Title I school. You can see here, again, they had several areas that did not make AYP the year before. They had some great gains in all those areas. And now over here we've got where they made AYP for their African American subgroup, their low income subgroup. Again, not high enough to meet the all standard for the all, or the AYP standard for the all group. But again, 5 subgroups down to, I think it's 3 now that they reduced it by 2. So they had some really nice gains there too. Monee. Monee did not make AYP in 2011 because right here, this all group did not get to 85%. They made AYP in all the other areas in reading and math. They had gains, and now this year they made AYP in all tested areas. This is the first year that they've made AYP in, 3 years? Past 2 they didn't. So they're still in state improvement status. They're not a Title I school, so if this year they repeat this performance, they will be out of state improvement status. Coretta Scott King, the thing about CSK, when you look at this, is their scores now are in the low to mid 90s. So any change that you're going to see here is really hard to come by, because we're not talking about moving a lot of kids. I mean, for them to show growth on this type of report is difficult. They're looking more at how do we move kids from a meets category to an exceeds category, because they have so many, I mean, most of their students are already meeting. So again, they've done great work, and they continue to do great work, and this report reflects the great work that they've done. The 6th grade center. The thing I want you to keep in mind about the 6th grade center, and we highlighted them last year, and we didn't jinx you, by the way. But these are different groups of kids. They're being judged how they did in 2011, and then how they changed in 2012, and it's all based on, you know, the assumption that you have the same kids, but they don't. So, you know, even though here it looks like they had a lot of areas where they made AYP in 2011 and it changed over here, it's an entirely new group of students. So what we prefer to highlight for them is just what's their track record? How have they done over the last 4 years? And when you look at where 5th graders are when they leave 5th grade, and then they go to the 6th grade center, and the 6th grade center gets them in late August, and they test them the first week of March, this is the kind of growth that the 6th grade center has been getting for our 6th grade students. So we're going to look at the cohort data, and you can see over the last 4 years, they have made significant, or they've made positive gains for their students in moving from 5th to 6th. And last year, I tweaked this a little bit because we were cleaning up some of our data here, but they had, you know, the kids moved 4% in reading and 4.9% in math. So again, when you go back to this report, it doesn't really reflect that idea of growth or change for the same group of students. The middle school. The middle school had some areas where they had some positive changes, but when you look at what they needed to do here, some of these went from green and some slight decreases, or even some slight gains, but not enough to make AYP. So some of their AYP areas went from meeting to not meeting. And when we broke this down and looked at the data, their 8th graders, when you look at them as a cohort, so how did they do in 7th grade versus how they did in 8th grade, they actually had gains in reading that were approaching 9%, and their math gains were closer to 6.5%. 7th grade did not fare as well. And for whatever reason, we've had some conversations about that. Class size will obviously help, I think. But 8th graders, so kids who have been with them for almost good year and a half, are showing good gains. Their 7th graders are new, so half their building is new every year, and that puts them with 7th grade in the same position that the 6th grade center is in, where they get that influx of new students. Unlike the elementaries that keep their kids, you know, they may come in kindergarten and they keep them through 3rd, and that's the first year they've tested them. They've had them for a while. As you know, the high school has a restructuring plan, and we've been following the plan, and our plan really focuses on our African American achievement and our low income achievement. And in this regard, they got some gains in those areas, but it wasn't, the gains that they're getting are not enough to change their AYP status. And the thing about high schools is that when you look at anything, even from the state, with regard to high school achievement compared to K-8 achievement, there is a great discrepancy. And so one of the things that the state put in their waiver to the federal government was that they want to try and level the playing field. So when we move from 8th grade to now 11th grade, first of all, we don't skip 9th and 10th grade because, you know, there's a 2 or 3 year period there. But also, how do we get the tests that kids take in grades 3 through 8 to be comparable to what students take in high school? Because right now we're looking at 2 different exams. The exam that the high schoolers take is ACT plus a work keys exam, and the ACT and the ISAT aren't exact. It's like apples and oranges. So the state is really looking at how to bridge that gap. Illinois is one of 9 states that uses the ACT as a test for all kids. And we actually, as a state, have the highest ACT average of those 9 states. Other states just use it, and primarily your kids that are headed to college take the test. But there are 9 states in the country that use it for all kids. So part of that is that we're using a test for college that college-bound students are taking. So this is another graph. We did this at our administrative retreat, but basically we're comparing 2011 to 2012, different kids at each grade level. But where the green arrows are, you can see that we've got some areas where the percentages have changed. 3rd grade went up in both reading and math, and again, it's 3rd graders from 2011 compared to 3rd graders from 2012. So not the same group of students, but nonetheless, this is what the state also looks at. So you can see we had several areas where those percentages went up. So we took this and we wanted to look at it because if we're truly moving away from NCLB, we're moving toward a growth model. So what does that cohort look like, the growth from one year to the next? And again, you can see when we look at 3rd grade reading and math, 4th grade reading and math, all the way through 8th grade reading and math, any place there's a green arrow, that group of students had positive growth from the previous year. The red arrow is our 7th grade reading, and as I mentioned earlier, that was one area where we had probably a more significant decline. It was about 9%. The other ones that changed toward the negative were minor changes, but that was our most significant decrease. The other thing that we always want to look at is what is the impact of mobility on our scores. It doesn't count. Our mobile kids don't count for the year that they come to us, but then they become part of the cohort and they count the year after. So on its surface, it doesn't really look like it's a lot. I mean, it's less than 4% for each one of those grade levels. You can see for 3rd grade, when we added our new students in, we took about almost a 2.5% decline. So you can see it did, but for every case, it was less than 4%. I think the thing we want to keep in mind is that this number right here for 2013 becomes kind of our base for the next year, because those kids will now be counted in the 2013 scores. And for math, it's pretty much the same. And you can see our math scores, typically math scores are higher than reading scores. but it's the same thing. Anything that changed because we added in our mobile students, those declines were less than 4%. The next section is our EPASS. This is our high school testing that we do every year. And one of the things that we've been focused on now for I think since Mike and I have been, probably before, but at least since Mike and I have been in the curriculum office, is how do we get the 8th graders to score above the national average? We want to boost those 8th grade scores before they enter high school. And what we did here was we put the national average score, and I put the yellow line here so you can see, kind of get an idea that those scores at the middle school has been doing a nice job of getting our kids prepared to go to high school. Those scores are typically, if you go across, a lot of them are above the national average, and they have been improving. So again, when I talked about the fact that ISAT and EPASS are apples and oranges, you can see that we're doing a much better job of getting our kids ready to go to high school, but yet our ISAT scores are something different and may not reflect that same level of performance. But this is something I think that the middle school can be proud of, and we can be proud of as a district, that we've really gotten kids ready for that EPASS exam beginning in 8th grade. Then what we do is in 9th grade in the fall, we do fall testing. This is the status of our freshmen. So it's not comparing 8th grade to 9th grade. They've only had the kids, we just tested last week. So this is last year's, but they only had the kids maybe a month. So it really is just a status of where our freshmen are starting. And one of the things you'll notice, it looks like they've gone down if we compare here. But if you look at the numbers in the black box, this is the national average for the time of year in which we give the 8th grade test. When you get to 9th grade, the norms change because we're giving the test 8, 9, 10 months later. So now the national average that's in the box actually goes up. And what you're going to see here as we move through is what we're finding is that our kids are not gaining at the rate they need to gain. So when we move from beginning of freshman year, now this is beginning of sophomore year, and again, that national average score continues to increase, and our kids, while we're getting some movement here, not enough to keep up with the pace of the national average. And then when you get to 11th grade, this is not a national average, this is a state average. And again, while our scores have gone up, this has outpaced our gains. And then finally, and this one here is our 11th grade, so this is what we take during PSAE. So this was last spring. And then when we get to what they give us every year is the official ACT report for our graduating class. So we received this summer. And what happens here is we get both a state and a national number, but this number typically goes up from where it did as an 11th grade group because we have students who are applying to colleges and they continue to take the ACT, so they may take it in the fall through the first semester. They're working really hard to improve their scores go up, and it impacts our average, so our average jumps. So this average from last year is 18.2, and that's our graduating class. Whereas as a junior class, they only got to 17.7, but because we had kids that continued to try and improve their scores, that average goes up for us. I don't know, Mike, is there anything you want to add to that? Okay. So Mike just said special ed's not included in that number either. Yes. Yes. know one of the things, and Mike and I've had some conversations this week about this. One of the things, and I don't think we mentioned this last week, this past year what we did for high school was we benchmarked. We had practice exams, ACT and Plan and Explore practice exams. So we were benchmarking kids all year long between this test and now what will be our fall test scores, because before we didn't really have an idea of where those numbers were headed. You know, it was just we'd take it here and then we'd take it again in the spring, but in between we had no way of knowing what the spring scores were going to look like. So last year we did some benchmarking, and we're actually crunching those numbers, and we'll bring it back to the board when we do our fall data so you can see what that looks like. The next section is school improvement plans. And again, let me just set the stage for this. NCLB, as I said, is the outgoing old model, and it's based on that idea of achievement or attainment, where every kid, no matter where they start, has to reach that score that allows them to meet state standards. In 2010, we had a new law passed called PARA, and it really what it addressed was this whole idea of student growth and evaluations. And for principals, it's happening this year. We did a pilot last year, but all of our principals have been working now with us to come up with their student growth goals for their evaluation. And now teachers will be coming on board in 2016, unless, of course, you're in CPS, which is part of their issue right now that they're dealing with. But that's one of those items that they're addressing. But what we're trying to do with our school improvement plans is realize that we need to be future focused, because if NCLB, whatever happens, if we get a waiver or it just expires on its own, it's going away. And the state model is moving toward this idea of growth. And so that's where we're trying to head with our school improvement plans. Our school improvement plans are focused on not only growth, but on the whole idea of transitioning to Common Core standards, because that test will be coming in another couple of years. And we want to be prepared for that. So really, when you look at the plans, keep in mind that we're trying to look at either cohorts of kids, 1 year to the next, or just individual students, moving them from point A to point B. Every fall we do, or I do, a focus. Let's set the academic focus for the staff. Some of this is a repeat of last year, or a continuation. I don't want to say a repeat, but it's a continuing theme. But this year we had 6 things that we talked about being a focus for this year. One is obviously the idea of developing curriculum so that it's aligned to the new standards. We've been working on that for the last 2 years, continuing to do so. We want to increase reading, writing, and discussion in our classrooms. We want to use research-based frameworks to focus on quality instruction. And we have in place already our teacher evaluation model, which is the Charlotte Danielson's framework for effective teaching. We've been using that for, I want to say, 9 years. It's the state-adopted framework. Districts do not have to adopt it, but the state did, and that was the basis of training that we did this summer. And it is, a highly research-based framework. John presented to staff earlier the Fundamental 5, which was a focus on instruction. And then we're also doing some training with staff on the instructional practices inventory that's going to help us with our classroom walkthroughs. So we want to make sure that we're using quality frameworks to look at instruction, and that we're in classrooms and we're actually observing it. Continued focus on collaborating in teams and looking at data. We want to make sure that we're looking at the data, we're making instructional decisions based on data, and that we're monitoring student growth. And then the last piece is this idea of formative assessments and feedback to students. So not just summative, not just giving tests and giving grades, but when we look at student work, how do we give feedback to students so that they know that they're moving toward achieving what we need them to achieve? Comments, things like that, rather than just the grade. So for school improvements for this year, we have some changes. First of all, we now reinstituted our school improvement teams. We used to have them, and people used to get paid for them by the hour. Then we took away the funding because of budget issues, and now we brought them back. We brought them back with a selection criteria for membership, with a performance feedback tool, so anyone that's on a school improvement team at the end of the year gets feedback on how they did. We also are requiring a time commitment, so I think the members have to be 64 hours, I think is what the commitment is for the year, and they get a stipend. So it's, you know, you're getting a stipend for this time commitment. We also now have the Rising Star Framework for school improvement, and I know we had a presentation last spring about that, but the whole purpose of Rising Star is to help facilitate a school improvement process rather than just creating a document. It looks like a promising framework for us. We're learning more about it. It's based on best practices. You have to assess indicators of best practice and look at where you are as a school and a district. It gives you online tools to help you with your meetings. And they've also now merged, or they are merging it, the Rising Star website with the Illinois Interactive Report Card any day now, I'm told. We keep waiting. But probably by next week it will all be merged, and they will give us a new school improvement plan template. And for those of you that were with us last week, this is new information for us because John and I met with our Rising Star people last Thursday, and they said, there's a new template, and some of your schools are going to have to use it. But we do have our district school improvement plans, which is what you received in your board packet. And those are, as I said, our district plans are those kind of consumer-friendly versions of the school improvement plans. And what we did in those is we didn't put NCLB goals, we put student growth goals. We had every building do that. So you're not going to see the typical language of, you know, by the spring of 2013, 92.5% of all tested students will meet state standards in reading. You're not going to see that. What you're going to see is probably something in the area of 3 to 5% based on looking at where kids are and how far we think we can move them in that time period. And that will be for both literacy, which is reading and writing, and math. This is new, again, from Thursday, but we will be bringing to the board the required NCLB school improvement plan. So we're still under that legally, but we will be bringing those to you based on the new template that they're giving us on this Rising Star website. And in December, these 4 schools will have plans that will be presented to you on that template. And then in January, we'll bring the district improvement plan to you. It'll look a little bit different than it has in previous years, but if you recall, each year now we've been bringing groups of school improvement plans to you that the state is requiring, and that requirement still continues under NCLB. So we'll be doing that starting in December. Themes, and I know you can read the plans, but what we're really talking about as far as reading, again, that focus on growth, the idea of analyzing data and doing instructional plans based on that, how we deliver our literacy instruction. Are we following best practices? Are we using good strategy instruction? At the elementary level, we have essential agreements about what literacy should look like. Professional development. Are we giving support with our reading coaches for good reading instruction, and are we monitoring that instruction? Are kids reading? One of the things that we looked a lot at is that volume of reading. Are we reading not only fictional work, pieces of work, but are we reading informational, nonfiction pieces of work? We've got, under Common Core, we have to increase that. Are we using best practice in vocabulary? Are kids learning about word study? We have to increase reading and writing. Again, that's embedded in the Common Core. This is the first year we actually have a K-12 writing plan, and I'll be bringing that to you when we get to the month for the writing. But we are implementing a K-12 writing plan. We continue to work on our curriculum development for Common Core. And the last one I can't really see, so I'm going to skip it. But you can see it on your plan. And then for math, it's pretty much, a lot of it's the same thing. It's that whole idea of assessment, data analysis, and instructional planning. We are implementing Common Core Math standards K-8 this year. We've done the curriculum work. It still has a ways to go, but we're in the beginning stages of implementation. We are going to continue that this year. Professional development for math is really more focused on instructional practices. In the high school, we have a gentleman by the name of Bill Hanlon that's working with our high school math department. We've been doing a lot of curriculum work with high school math in the last couple of years, but Bill's focus is, his theme is instruction and assessment for student success. So he's in the classrooms, he's co-teaching with teachers, he's teaching them his strategies for successful instruction. They're very excited about it. We've had the opportunity to see Bill in action, and he really is an expert, and I'm really excited about the work that the high school math department is going to do in that area this year. 6-8 has a new math series, and we're going to adopt a new one for K-5 this year. Our schools all use Study Island, which is kind of a test prep, but it's also more, can be used as an intervention program, and it gets good results, so all of our schools have that. We're focusing on response to intervention, which I think was the last one on the reading slide too, so we want to make sure our interventions are of quality. And then there are other practices that you'll see in the school improvement plans that may differ from building to building, but again, they're really focused on best practices. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Arasola to update us on special ed.
Finally, thank you. It's kind of late. So one of the things that, in addition to focusing on the curriculum and ensuring that students with disabilities are accessing the gen ed curriculum, the state holds us to 20 indicators, and they range from ensuring that we have appropriate data to the one that we have been focusing on for the past year, which is our educational environment. So if you look at the enrollment over time, you see that in general, special education or students with IEPs has decreased over the past 5 years. So our percentage has gone down, and that's a good thing, because what we're trying to do is, if you look at the bottom, our state average is 14.5%, and we are currently at 17.2, or that was at where we were at the end of the past school year. So our goal is to keep decreasing the percentage, and one of the things that one of the reasons we are being successful is what we're doing in our district as far as providing better supports for students so that they don't reach that special ed level, and as well as ensuring that we're providing inclusive opportunities such as implementing our co-teaching programs. So again, a comparison over time. If the state says that we should have had 49.9% of our students in our least restrictive environment, which is those students with disabilities who spend 80% or more of their time in general ed. Unfortunately, we were at 42.3%, and the state acknowledged that as being an area of concern, so therefore we were monitored in 2011. As you can see, though, in the past year, due to some review of data, as well as reviewing the practices to ensure greater fidelity, we increased to 48.2%. So that was a significant growth. And while we didn't meet the 49.9%, they had established a lower percentage that we did have to meet, which was, I believe, 47. Wait, let me go back. I can't see it. It's okay. One of the things that we did look at is a breakdown of students with disabilities in their general environments by grade level. And as you see, what happens as the students move into middle school and high school, we have a reduction in the percentage of students that are spending greater amounts of time in the gen ed. We also have some pockets in our EE data. If you look, for example, kids in first grade, we have 53.7%, which is a great percentage, who are in the general ed setting. And then we have 9.3% in our EEO2. And then again, it increases to 33.3. What we want to see is we want to see a higher percentage of students in EEO2, a higher percentage in EEO1, and we want to reduce that EEO3 to probably something closer to 20%, if that. So we do have some work to do in those areas. We still look really good, but we need to focus on decreasing our 0.3 percentage. In the last column, you'll notice that there are numbers in parentheses. What we do is EEO4 are our co-op programs. Those are special education programs in what we call public entities. So those would be like your co-op programs. If your park district had a program, if your own district had like a special school, those are those programs. And in parentheses, we also see numbers of students who are in separate programs. Those are very specialized schools. And over the past few years, one thing that has happened is we have increased significantly in students who need significant supports that cannot be met not only in district, but can't be met in our therapeutic programs that are offered by our co-op. So the focused monitoring update, which was that by March 2013, the ISB had indicated that we as an entity had to have at least 47.8 of our students in the gen ed setting. We did meet that in this past March, and our personal goal is to have it to increase to 50% by June 2013. And actually, I think we will be pretty close to that. I think we might have exceeded it already. So I think we're on a really good track. Questions? Yay.
Okay. I'm sorry. Question? No. Just the last slide here. This is the proposed schedule for our monthly academic reports. We'd like to give you starting next month our updates on our math curriculum work. In November, talk about what we're doing in writing. In December, in reading. In January, we'll bring a mid-year report to you where we'll probably do this with our education committee, but we'll talk about what our fall data looks like. And then, of course, in December and January, we'll also have those school improvement plans and district improvement plan for you. February, we'd like to focus on our instruction, the instructional practices inventory and the fundamental 5. And then in March, we thought we'd come back with something on response to intervention. We do have Ron Morabito, who is our response to intervention and PBIS coordinator, and we thought by March we'd have Ron ready to to talk to the board about what his work's been. So in March, RTI. April, we could come back. We're expecting our focus monitoring visit in March, and we thought by April we would have the results of that. And then in May, we have our annual discipline committee meeting where we thought we could talk about PBIS. And I know Mr. Heisel suggested that possibly in May or maybe June, we could also talk about some high school programs, things like Project Lead the Way, Kankakee, Prairie State, and of course we've got our our monthly where schools are presenting too, so we want to incorporate that somewhere in the plan. And I don't know if the board has any other topics that they'd be interested in, or if you have questions about the presentation, certainly be happy to answer them. Okay, yeah, we can certainly do that. And I'll talk with some of the buildings that have those courses, and we'll do that. Well, thank you very much for your time and your patience. That's because they don't have a subgroup. It's not large enough to be identified as a subgroup. It has less than 45 students. So that's what the NA means in any place. So there, and I can go back here if you want to take a look at it. Getting there? There it is. So you can see that they, at one time in 2011, they had a white subgroup. But in 2012, they didn't have enough students that were tested to make that, to reach that number of 45. I'm sorry. I'm not sure I understand what you. If I wanted to see what the white test scores were, actually, it's not published in the AYP report because it's not recorded as a subgroup. We would have that information as a district when we look at our rosters, and I think this is, Aaron, would you? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So when it's posted, it'll go on the interactive report card. Right, but that in 2011 we didn't have those. But before that, when we had 7th and 8th grade there, we had a larger pool of students that were tested. Thank you.
As soon as it goes into this, then it screws up. There's something in there that you just don't really. Do we have any other comments about the report from Ms. Hirsch, from any other board members at all?
Again, I just think overall it was an excellent presentation, and just moving forward, I feel pretty good about the topics that's going to be presented on a monthly basis. So thank you, Assistant Superintendent Laura, and all your support and staff that had anything to do with the presentation. Good job.
And not only that, just seeing the growth, whether the state is recognizing it or not, or I think our schools should be commended for the things that they do on a day-to-day basis to help our kids, become successful. So even as a board, I think it's important that we acknowledge, our schools are growing, and as far as an achievement, and to make sure that we acknowledge that with our schools, that we do recognize that, our principals and our staff members are working hard every day, and we are seeing the fruit of their labor.
I want to agree with both members' statements on that. I think one of the things that sometimes I don't want to say fail to encourage and specify all the time is the improvements that each of the schools do make and are attempting to do based on the requirements of state, federal, and all kinds of other things that are being driven by what we're doing. You know, it's difficult work, you know, trying to teach a child. You know, I'm sorry to say, but it is. And, you know, we should commend everybody that's involved in that kind of process, that they do a good job, even though sometimes there's some people in the public that will say that we're not doing a good enough job. But, you know, God bless us to continue trying to do this good work that we're trying to do here and stuff. And, you know, I really want to commend everybody that's involved in it. You know, Mr. Dugan over there, Ms. Hirsch, John Rogers, all the other staff, and everybody that's associated with educating our students over here. So, you know, before I get off my high horse here and stuff like that, thank you very much for all your efforts and keep up the good work. You know, it's difficult to make small gains, but I think everybody in the communities that understand what's going on, you know, do see that kind of thing and appreciate it. So, thank you very much. Okay. Go ahead, John.
Mr. President, there's just one suggestion I would like to make, you know, for next year. I think if we really, you know, want to even give the public a chance to engage with the board or the administration about the academic report, I think that next year, and I'm not asking for a response, I just want you to think about it right now. There's hardly been a year that I know of that the academic report isn't given almost at 9:30, close to 10 o'clock. You know, you really don't have an audience. So I think it should almost be considered to either be put to the audience, whatever audience we have, you know, at around the district, or we just have to make it the first report, because it seems like no matter what we do, it always ends up at the end. It's always late, people are tired, people are sleepy, and I don't think we're giving the report justice. And so I just think, I just want the board to think about that, because next year I just don't want to see it put this late on the agenda. That's just my opinion.
I agree with you there. So, you know, good things should be out in the public as soon as we can possibly get it out there. So, okay. Again, thank you. Next up is old business, and because my Adobe Reader has unfortunately quit working here, I don't have anything that I can look at. So I got a piece of paper here with IASB workshop date on it. So I'm going to ask for some assistance in figuring out what date this is, or what we can do, or I can't get to it.
You know what, for some odd reason, I don't see anything. Did we actually, we do have attachments, right, Terry?
Mine died. Mine died.
So we did not put the attachment, so do we know what the dates he gave us?
Is yours working?
Okay. Why don't we just go to the next one, because I'm going to try to log in into Board Book and look at the FYI to see the date. So do you see, Mark, what the next, at least what the next topic is?
Yeah. Next board meeting is Wednesday, the 26th of September. I believe that that's for presentation of the budget
Public hearing.
because of law requirements or whatever. That's really about the only thing that's going to be on the agenda, I believe, that evening. So is the budget for the 26th, so at 6:30. So just to remind everybody about that. Finance Committee meeting is Tuesday, October 2nd. Okay, 6:30. Everybody's aware of that. And then we also have a Personnel Committee meeting if we need to. Chairs Ms. Coletti over there, I believe. You know. Do we need a meeting?
Well, we'll let I do want the Personnel Committee to tentatively pencil it in because right now there may be, one or two items, but we're not sure yet. So please put it on your calendar, and then we'll let you know that week, probably a couple days before the meeting, whether or not we'll actually need to have one. But this year, I don't want us to not schedule it. At least schedule it, and then we'll let you know. But again, like I said, I don't want to call you in if there isn't anything really to talk about. But Friday, October 5th is the day, 8:30 at Central Office. And like I said, we'll let you know at least. I'll give you an exact time where we'll let you know. We'll let you know by October 2nd, that Tuesday, because if we're going to have the meeting, we have to post it that Wednesday. So if we don't know for sure by Tuesday, then we won't have a meeting. But if we do know, we'll let everybody know and we'll post the meeting. So, okay, I hope. All right.
Very good. Next item we have on old business is Board of Education values. Kind of going to defer that to Dr. Rogers if you got anything.
Yes, I was approached by Board Member Hall to bring this to the board's attention. I'm going to let her speak because I don't want to speak for her, but she felt that it was a very good discussion about board values and wanted to see them again in terms of just to see visibly what the board said that they valued. And I think that she wanted to propose to the board some things that she might want the board to consider doing with those values. I don't know if that's in terms of policy or declaration of, a declarative type statement or what, but I'll let Board Member Hall speak for herself.
At our workshop, we talked about and came up with these core values, and I think it was Board Member Brown that also suggested putting these before the public at every board meeting, just so it's communicated to everyone what our values are and that we're constantly reminded that everything we do is reflecting from these core values. So I think we had a brief discussion about possibly doing these in a declarative manner, posting them in our boardroom, as well as posting them here on the agenda for the public to know for their knowledge. So I felt like, that's a discussion to have as a board and something, that we can decide if we want to do something, like that.
Yeah, and I also kind of coincide with, I feel that at minimum, every board meeting that we should state the reason why we are here, which is indicated via our mission statement. So as we say the Pledge of Allegiance every time prior to commencing with our board meeting, I think we should state our mission statement as well. Something short and concise prior to, again, getting into our board meeting. So once we all clearly understand, the public will know exactly what we're here for at that moment, and we state our mission, and everything should reflect that mission at every meeting.
And I know I think my first year on, there was a brochure that was actually created with the board members. Because you're right, the public desires to know who the board members are and, things like this. And this is just, going back to us communicating with the public and not appearing to be an unapproachable board or, in that manner or whatever. But, again, just building rapport with the public and expressing why we're here and why we do what we do and why we volunteered to have these positions, and communicating that.
Do we, I see the various values, core values and mission statements and goals and all of that we've got listed here on our agenda here and stuff. Is that something that we print out and we have available for the public, on the tables back there? Or how do we manage this or disseminate it more so for the general public that we're trying to do this for? We've got this stuff written over here. Is it something that we just need to communicate better to them, or is it something that we need to look at, evaluate, upgrade, that kind of thing? Do we need to have some discussions about this? I'm kind of, whatever the feeling of the board is. I don't have a problem with, doing these kind of things.
I feel like it's something that should be thought about by the board as a whole, all the members, arriving at a central mission statement, not our individual beliefs or values, because frankly, we're a board, each one of us acting on behalf of all of the residents of the district, and I don't think necessarily our personal beliefs, values are foremost. It's what we come together as a board and agree will be our mission, and that's how I feel about it. So I think we do need to collaboratively formulate a mission statement.
Is this something that, we should have, probably some open discussions then? And I'm thinking the best way to do it is, with Cone or
Right.
whatever, as a directive like that. We've got some things that are already developed here and stuff, but maybe we need to just spend some time, whenever we can agree to meet, as a 7-member board to discuss these things and to come up with either revisions to what we've got or to change what we've got or to add new things to it and stuff like that. And I think that my own personal belief is that everybody would be agreeable to that kind of thing. So just a matter of us sitting down and doing that kind of work. So sooner rather than later, but, we've got, some dates that he's looking for, and hopefully, Terry and Dr. Rogers can, get something that's agreeable to everybody here soon, so.
Yeah, Nancy, we're referring to the core values that we all created, with the exception of Mrs. Sanders wasn't there, and I'm sure we would love her input, but the ones that we came up with Jeff.
But those were more, that night it was more of him polling us individually, what are your core values? And I don't think we came together and said, okay, we all agree that this is, what our value,
No, this was a list that we created.
Right, we created a list, but individually we gave input. So what I'm saying is I think that we need to come together more with more of a consensus type of list, I guess is what I'm saying.
We can do that, on a separate meeting like with Mr. Cohn, or we can even do it if we set some time off at a regular board meeting to have these kind of discussions. They need to be in an open session because, it's not a closed session item to do that kind of thing. So, I think if our time can work to have some guidance from the IASB, people and stuff, that would, really help us. If not, then we need to spend some time at a board meeting doing it. So, I think it's good. It's just a matter of, like I said, setting some time to do that. So, I think we're going to kind of be at the mercy of whenever.
I found the
Okay.
dates.
John just gave me some dates here or whatever. October 3rd, 4th, October 16, 17, 18, 19.
Those are the dates Jeff said he would be available.
I think 16, 17, 18, 19, I'm not here.
Okay.
That's that middle week in October that I'm not going to be here.
Oh,
I'm not available the 4th.
I'm not either, not on the 4th.
No.
October 3 and 4, and then there's also October 16, 17, 18, 19.
I think Terry brought to my attention that you won't be here that third week.
It's this week right there.
And I'm not going to be here on the 3rd and the 4th because we're going to, Terry and I are going to be at a LUDA conference. I think what we need to do is maybe, I want to suggest this, is that the next board meeting, first of all, when all of us are here again, meaning we need to have Tom and Kim here, to maybe everyone look at their calendar collectively and try to come up with as many dates as you can for, we won't see each other again collectively until November, or October, I mean, October,
26th?
because Tom won't be here next week. And to just pick some dates that you guys think that would be available, and we give those to Jeff. And hopefully at the October meeting we can have some dates that Jeff will definitely say would be out of range for him, and decide that very night, meaning have the dates in front of us with everybody here so we can get back with him the next day.
So should we zero in on a certain month, or are you asking for dates in?
Well, I think it's really a board discussion, because I will try to be here anytime that the board, can all collectively say we can be here. But I think it's hard to, even if you guys decided tonight on 2 dates, 2 or 3 dates, without Kim and without Tom here, I think we'd be starting, back to scratch, because if they come in and say they can't make those dates, you guys probably aren't going to want to meet without the full board, or at least giving everyone a chance to, meet. It's almost impossible to set a date without all your board members here.
No, I'm saying when you said start thinking of dates, are we zeroing in on a certain month?
Oh, at this rate, it would have to be, it looks like the first available week that it sounds like anyone would be able, it would be the last week in October going forward to, the holidays, meaning November and whatever few dates in December people may have. There's not really a lot of dates between October and December because of the holidays, so it's not going to be a whole lot of time, but I would look at those 2 months in that 1 week in October. That would just be my suggestion.
I can get a hold of Jeff and ask him more dates, like the last week of October and some November times and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what's the best thing that we could do other than just, pull dates out of the hat, and hopefully everybody could make it, but I think, we need to have some direction from IASB too, and that would certainly help. I think, if we meet and stuff, we can go through what he needs to cover, and then also go through what Nakia and everybody else is suggesting that we do as far as these board goals and things like that. So I think it's well worthwhile to do it. It's just a matter of trying to get some time to do it.
Right.
And I think we made some progress at our last workshop. I would hate to start from scratch.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think we did start building that foundation. So
Yeah, and in my opinion too and stuff, we've started doing it, and even if we don't happen to be able to do anything until after the first of the year, at least we've got some progress being made. I don't like to see it go that far and stuff, but I think that, it's important work, as a board for us to grow together and to try to do something like that. And I think, if we did it before, even the conference that we're going to and stuff like that, we'd be able to, have some discussions, of what we're going to do at the conferences or something like that. So, I'm just seeing what sticks on the wall.
Okay.
Okay. Getting late. Everybody okay with that? We'll talk about it maybe next week a little bit too if some other people are here. So, new business. Unless, John, you got some other old business at all? No? Announce the upcoming committee meeting dates. We already did that, I believe.
Yeah, we did.
We did that already.
Yes.
So, next thing we don't have to go closed session again at all.
No.
No other action, so I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mrs. Coletti, second by Mrs. Stockton. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions, none. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah, it's not 10.